Demigods and half-bloods, welcome inside Comic Book Nation's Riptide Radio, your Percy Jackson Aftershow. And today we are dealing with all things Percy Jackson, Episode 3, the episode with Medusa. I am not alone on this quest. I am ComicBook.com's Liam Crowley, joined alongside by Miss Nicole Drum. Nicole, Kion, the goddess of the snow, tried to stop you from being here, but you persevered. I'm so happy to see you. How was your Christmas?
My Christmas is great. How was yours?
It was lovely, and I was looking forward to this the entire Christmas day because I knew we were getting Percy Jackson on the 26th, and I was like, that is the real present under the tree. And a big present we have for you guys who are listening in, we have 2 brief interviews from the Blue Carpet, the Percy Jackson premiere a couple weeks ago with Tim Sharp, the actor who plays Gabe Ugliano, as well as Jessica Parker Kennedy, who plays Medusa herself. We're going to weave those in when appropriate. But Nicole, I feel like we should just get started. Percy Jackson, Episode 3. You all just watched it. We're in prime time now, baby. We're actually watching this live with everyone else. Nicole, your initial thoughts coming off of Percy Jackson Episode 3. How did this compare to the premiere?
I feel like I'm going to say this like every episode, like I'm going to be a broken record, but like this might be my favorite episode to date thus far. I think it also might be the episode that I was looking most forward to because we're building on the stakes that were set, but it's also the episode that we get Medusa. And so for me, I was very excited for this episode and it did not disappoint. I think everything in this was just layered and rich and interesting. And I really, the show just keeps getting better episode to episode, I feel like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't know if this is my favorite episode, bar none. I really like Capture the Flag and everything we got in episode 2, but I thought this episode was a giant test for this show. And I say that because it's standing on the shoulders of 3 very young leads. And I believe I mentioned this last week. A big test for them was going to be not sharing the screen with a veteran actor. So far, we've had our Jason Mantzoukas's, we've had our Glyn Turmans, we've had our Megan Mullally's that they've had the opportunity to share the screen with. Now they're just relying on each other. And I thought there were some moments where it felt like we were kind of tiptoeing into that, but there are also other moments where it was very clear that they've gotten very comfortable with each other. We're developing that chemistry. We're developing that bond. And I know we just kind of like tiptoed around like spoiler-free territory. I feel like it's time to discuss this episode in full, in-depth detail. You're all joining us after watching it, so I feel like it's fair to say spoiler warning here and now. But just in case, spoiler warning. We're not going to go chronologically in terms of reviewing this episode, but one thing we do have to start out with is the first thing that happens, and that is the delivery of our first ever prophecy. Our first ever prophecy in Percy Jackson and the Olympians in live action form on Disney Plus, and Mr. Tim Sharp as Gabe Ugliano delivered it, and he actually spoke to me about delivering the first ever prophecy and feeling that responsibility on the blue carpet. Check out what he had to say. You deliver the first prophecy in this. I'm getting goosebumps just saying that out loud. You deliver the first prophecy in this series. If everything goes well, we're going to hear many more, and you were the first one. Talk to me about that day on set of reciting those lines.
Well, so they did something that I've never had done to me on this show, where they put me in this like chamber with all of these cameras to do like these 3D renderings of my entire body. I had to do all these different facial expressions for that scene, so that I could, I guess, come out of the Oracle's mouth or something. I haven't seen it yet, but then on set that day, I was actually there doing it, and we did it a few different ways. I'm very curious to see which way that they chose. I said the lines very monotone, like, somebody was, animating my body. I also did, I think, a version where I did it very Gabe Ugliano. I can't remember what I say in the prophecy, but I did it very Gabe, and I don't think they went with that one, but it was fun. They let me have a lot of fun with it, do different options.
And so, Nicole, I wanted to ask you the delivery, not just of the prophecy, but the VFX, the green smoke, the Oracle herself. Was that how you pictured it on the page, and did it execute well on screen?
I felt like it looked a little bit different than how I imagined it, but I like how it looked on screen better than what I could have imagined, because it was just a little creepier is the wrong term, but it was a little creepier on some level. Like, it felt a little more serious. I was just like, okay, I'm a little scared for him right now. Especially, it felt like it had more gravity the way it was presented. I feel like I really liked the VFX. I feel like the show is just killing it with its VFX on a lot of levels. I really do, and this scene was no exception for me.
And what I found interesting about the VFX is my initial gut reaction to this was like, I didn't really like. It was a little kind of cheesy for me in the way that they executed Gabe being like within the green mist. But the second time I watched it, I just embraced it as like, this is like how it would look in like the early 2000s in like an awesome nostalgic kind of way. And I feel like this wasn't a situation of the VFX budget. They didn't want to attribute a ton to making this look hyper realistic. I feel like they were going for that kind of like retro nostalgic feel. And I'm curious to see, as the future prophecies come in later seasons, if we look back on this with rose tinted glasses, or if we look back on this and go, oh, wow, they did have to evolve it a bit. But still, I enjoyed how they executed it.
I also have to wonder how much of that was also what would be a weird and disconcerting moment for a young person who's never experienced a prophecy before, because that would be it. That weird kind of, because that's, for me, that's how I read it. I read it as kind of creepy and a little weird. I feel like the way it was presented is because that's the first time, obviously, it's the first time he's getting a prophecy. So that's a disorienting moment for the character. So maybe that's why it looks that way. You're right. Maybe a few seasons down the road, the later prophecies we get will look very different for different reasons.
Yeah, and something I love what they do here is, again, we're talking about the luxuries of adapting something that's on the page versus screen. And something can be great on the page and not work well on screen. Something can look visually stunning on screen and not translate well to written words. What I loved what they did here is, in the book, every time we get a prophecy, we see the full thing right before our very eyes. We reread a prophecy in full. Here, though, they broke it up and they waited to deliver the second half of the prophecy. You will be betrayed by one who you call friend. Having that conversation with Grover. And I love that they made that decision, because that is a way to give us Percy's inner monologue without having him actually monologue on screen.
Yes.
I say that in the sense of like, it's clear what he's thinking there is like, okay, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. I think I can trust Grover, but he did kind of backstab me at Yancey Academy, and I saw where he was coming from later on, but still I'm tiptoeing. And the fact that he chose him to come on this quest, but we then get his memory of that line in the prophecy.
Yes.
It gave me chills just thinking about it. Cause I'm like, okay, this Percy kid, he might be new to this world, but he's still thinking 2 steps ahead.
Absolutely. And it ties together so beautifully, all those little pieces too. It really does.
Yeah. And I love too, the way that we select Grover and Annabeth for this quest. Cause in the Lightning Thief, it's been a minute since I've read the book, but I believe it was kind of like they were always going to be grouped together. But I love the idea of like, no, Annabeth is with me right away. Grover, I'm going to go to him personally and also let him know that he's with me, but maybe that's because I can't necessarily trust him. And that's another topic we have to dive into throughout this episode. Percy's relationships in general with Grover, with Annabeth, and with Luke. Let's start with Luke, because that's the one we spend the least amount of time with, but we arguably get some of the biggest depth with because of just the conversations they have. He says to Luke, he admits to him straight up, he thought about choosing him over Grover. When you hear that moment and he's sharing it personally with Luke, what's going through your head as someone who knows these books inside and out?
Part of me wants to know what the reality is like if he had chose him. Like, I want to know what direction that would go. If I granted, keep in mind, I love we're getting the books as they are, but part of me is like, oh, I know your story, and I really wish I knew what the reality looked like if he had chosen you for this quest. But also, I love how heartfelt their friendship is. Even this early on, like, it warms my heart. And then he gives him the shoes, and it's just this sweet moment, and just that's probably the most heartwarming. And if you're familiar with it, was also heartbreaking on some level as well. I love those actors, and they just put so much into that scene that just felt so beautiful. And yeah, part of me is like, I really wish we lived in a reality where I could see that version of the quest.
The bond is real. They're brothers for
life.
It is.
No, brothers for life.
I don't see them ever separating, ever going their separate ways. I joke in that sense, but also like it makes the second half of the season so intriguing for me, because Charlie Bushnell right now is playing such a believable friend. He's playing such a believable mentor figure to Percy. Like him giving him the shoes and Maya and everything, and being like, they're a gift from my dad, and I'm trusting you with them. I'm buying in. I'm getting gaslit right now, Nicole, and I've read all the books. I know where this story is going. And that's
where the heartbreak comes in.
The heartbreak is slowly setting in, but something that is slowly setting in the opposite direction, the love that's forming between Percy and Annabeth. It's very subtle, it's very small, and right now they're very much on complete opposite ends of the spectrum. But I love some moments that we get between them throughout this episode. That's when Annabeth and Percy are first arguing about, going on this quest, having to escape Mrs. Dodds, the bus crashes and all that. And she drops that line of, Grover was my protector first. You don't have ownership over him necessarily. They have an outburst over Percy wanting to ask Camp for help. And then when she says no, he says, why don't we ask Athena for help? And when she says, I can't ask Athena, she starts pushing a little bit, kind of trying to question her relationship with her mother, which I thought was like, damn, Percy, we're pushing buttons here. Annabeth herself pushing Percy, being like, you have to understand that you're not just anybody, you're somebody. You're not just any demigod. You killed the Minotaur. She's trying to push him to realize his full potential. And the one last quote I have here is at the very end of the episode when they're going to freeze Mrs. Dodds into stone with Medusa's head. She says, make sure the head's pointing in the right direction, which, in a fight or flight scenario, she just showed her true colors. She cares about this Percy Jackson fellow. And I thought that was pretty heartwarming. A nice little tease of how that relationship is going to blossom.
I also just love the line delivery of that line. It was just so perfectly, the tonal perfection. I love the line delivery. I'm not gonna lie, I did laugh at that line because it just was. It's one of those things that you're like, oh yeah, you do want that pointing in the right direction. I thought her delivery was just so good. It really was.
And how do we feel about just like the progress we're making on this related? Because everyone on social media right now is like counting down the days until Annabeth calls Percy Seaweed Brain and Percy calls Annabeth Wise Girl. Everyone is like freaking out of like, we got to get to the not the finish line, but we got to get to a checkpoint sooner than later. And I said this on another podcast about Percy Jackson recently. Exposition is a good thing. We gotta take our time getting to these places, and I like where the relationship is at right now. Does it have time, obviously, to reach those big checkpoints? For sure, but for now, I think it's in a good place, and I feel like it's easy to forget if we're on episode 3 right now of what could be 40 episodes in this whole series. It's important to realize, like, we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, I think we're all just starving for it. We just want it now. But no, I think it's pacing nicely. We're building towards it. The reward is going to be worth it.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the last relationship that Percy's kind of developing in this episode, and that's the one with Grover. I kind of said it a little bit at the beginning, the whole wondering if he's going to trust him or not. Is he bringing him along just to kind of keep him close? How do you feel about Percy and Grover's relationship? This is the most tense I've ever seen it depicted in live action. It's not even tense per se, but like on the books, on the page, I never once got the idea that like Grover and Percy don't see eye to eye. And for now, it feels like Percy's kind of keeping him on a tight leash because he doesn't necessarily fully trust him.
I feel bad for Grover in this. Like you feel, you get, again, on the page, you don't really feel it, but you really feel like he is being like in the most uncomfortable and awkward situation possible. He finds out that, not the first choice, not really trusted, and all this is going on. I genuinely felt bad for Grover, which I don't think I've ever really felt bad for Grover before like this. And I don't know. I like how they're approaching it because it, on a certain level, it shows the characters at their maturity level and where they're at, which I think is really interesting because it's sometimes easy to lose sight of considering how talented the actors are and how well written the books are. As a grown-up who has read the books, I think it's sometimes easy to forget that these are kids. And seeing these kind of like uncertain feelings, these kids in this very adult situation, there's some raw feelings there. And I just felt so bad for Grover in that. I felt bad for Grover for a couple of things in this episode, but specifically that, like, especially when he's clearly got his own demons that he's dealing with, the things he's failed at, the choices he's had to make, and things that haven't quite gone that way. And then, of course, him trying to like keep the peace and keep everything. You just feel bad for him. And I really like how they did it because I think it adds a layer of depth to it and makes this a more interesting version of the group going forward on this quest. It's going to make the quest more interesting, too.
And what I love what you said there about how you feel bad for Grover. And it's also important to remember that Grover is his own character. He's not a sidekick. He's not just a supporting player. Sure, he's a protector. I almost said searcher,
Protector.
like Harry Potter, Quidditch or whatever. Speaker. I'm mixing everything up. Either
Wrong job. Wrong fandom.
Grover is a protector, And it's easy to forget that he also has his own mission within that, which if you know the books, it's finding Pan and bringing back, sanctity to the wild and all that. And what I love too is that it's Aryan Samhadri, who plays Grover, understands all this. He knows that Grover's his own character. We spoke at the LA press junket for Percy Jackson, and I asked him about the elements of Grover's backstory that we're not necessarily exploring on screen, but we're kind of filling in with like hints of lines of dialogue we see in this episode with Uncle Ferdinand, and he gave me a great response. Check it out.
Aryan, with Grover, what I find so fascinating about that character is there's so much implied backstory. The Council of Cloven Elders, Uncle Ferdinand at Auntie M's. How much of that are you filling in your head, and how much of that are you just kind of like, let's plant a seed here, maybe water it in future seasons?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, like Leah mentioned, Andrew, our acting coach, he did a huge deep dive of the books. He scoured it like we all did when we started. And Uncle Ferdinand was like a huge part of like for Grover in the books. And getting to bring that to life, like getting to give Grover his moment, because, I've said this before, but it's easy to forget that Grover is like his own guy. He's not just a mediator. He's not just a protector. He's going through his own stuff. He has so much to prove after, Thali and all that just getting to, I guess, do him justice felt really good.
And a big thing that makes these relationships that Percy is having so tense is the various ultimatums we get throughout this episode. I believe there are just two, but they're two very big ones. The first one comes when Mrs. Dodds shows up randomly on the bus that they're on. She's stalking these kids. She's an agent of Hades. She's not questioning why he needs Percy, but she's just going to bring him in, no questions asked. And Annabeth, with her Yankees cap on, is having a little conversation while she's invisible. And Mrs. Dodds offers the ultimatum. You give me Percy, I'll let you go fulfill your quest on your own, which, again, two birds, one stone. They don't necessarily need Percy to complete the quest. They have their own mission. And Annabeth has always wanted to not just go on a quest, but fulfill a quest, bring that glory to Camp Half-Blood. And she declines. And then later in the episode, Medusa gives a similar ultimatum to Percy, where she acknowledges that, listen, this quest, you want to retrieve Zeus's Master Bolt, that's not your main objective. You really want to save your mother. And these two could get in your way. I could take care of them. I could make them statues just like that. You say the word, I'll make it happen. And Percy declines. It shows that there is some empathy developing within this trio. And it shows that they are no longer just soldiers of Camp Half-Blood married to their mission. It makes me think of the new movie that came out on Netflix, The Killer, with Michael Fassbender.
Oh yeah.
Don't anticipate, don't improvise. They're not like that. They very much have real feelings. They care for each other. And I thought these ultimatums were a great way to showcase the slow and subtle bond these three are forming.
Absolutely. And I also think it's interesting to note that, like, specifically with Annabeth and hers, I think on some level, and again, this is just my thinking about it, is that she's already been through the loss of someone. And I think for her, this, hey, I'll trade you, probably on some level, it's like, no, I don't want to lose anyone else. Like, I have to redeem myself, maybe. This is probably something she's thinking. I mean, she is a child of Athena. Of course, she's got to be thinking of there's a right way to do things. And I kind of felt like maybe that was part of her thought process in that. And then with Percy, I just kept thinking about, like, that entire sequence when he's talking, getting the ultimatum. I thought about that moment of him and his mom in the museum. And it just, to me, that whole moment just spoke of the good person his mom is and how that has reflected on him, and that he is not going to sacrifice other people just for this, because she always tells him, not all heroes are heroes, kind of thing. And I think that might have been weighing in his mind a little bit, specifically since it's coming from the woman whose head was being held in that statue.
That's a really good point. Yeah, we get this kind of full circle, and I'm glad you brought up that head in the statue, because that is the main event of this episode. The woman we've been waiting to see, Auntie M herself, Medusa, in the Gnome Emporium. It leapt from page to screen. Garden teased it on social media earlier today, that little Auntie M's plaque outside of the Gnome Emporium. Seeing little things like that, I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever, because this came from this guy's mind. And now it's just like in front of our eyes in live action. The first thing I want to ask you, Nicole, something I asked Jessica Parker Kennedy on the blue carpet, Medusa's look in this episode. We knew what it was going to be going in because we saw her in the trailer. She got her own character poster. She was showcased at New York Comic Con, but still seeing it in live action, visually moving around, getting kind of her whole aesthetic down. Not what we were expecting, sunglasses and like hair tied up. No, this is like dripped out 1920s, 30s, 40s, all melded into one Medusa when she walked on screen. What did you feel?
Oh my God, I loved it. Like, I part of me was just like, I know she's bad news. I want to be her friend. Like, I loved everything about what they did. The way that the hat and like the very sleek, she almost tricks you into believing that she's harmless and that she's just been maligned. And I want to give a shout out to the VFX on those snakes, because those snakes, like, we have seen different iterations of Medusa across different media, not like the Percy Jackson Medusa, but just Medusa in general. And snake hair is hard to get and make it look cool, like not scary, but cool. The VFX on those snakes is so good. Like, I just loved how subtle they were, just little subtle movement. I was just like, oh my God, she would have me turn to stone so fast because she was just so cool. And like her entire look, the inside of her house, she kind of reminded me of like some like eccentric old lady and like lives alone in one of those like noir movies where, you know, the unsuspecting gentleman comes and is trapped forever. Like, I loved that vibe. It just was so jarring comparatively, but it worked so perfectly for this. Yeah. Even though I had questions like, why would she be cooking dressed like that? But that's neither here nor there. She's Medusa. She does what she wants.
And the spread she had too. All those snacks just before cheeseburgers. I was like, that is a meal in and of itself already.
Seriously.
I love that you love Medusa's look, because someone who also loved Medusa's look is the actress who played her, Jessica Parker Kennedy. She was raving about her fit on the blue carpet. Check it out.
Medusa is dripped out in this show. A very different look than what we've seen in graphic novels and prior movies. Just talk to me about when you first saw the character design for Medusa.
I freaked out. She was the coolest. I was like, I can't play this. I'm not that cool. She's, it's a very like 30s, 40s kind of like vibe to her. Almost 20s too. I don't know. Is it 20s? Is it 30s? Is it 40s? It's all of them combined. Like her very long red nails and red lip, and she's, you know, very still, and there's something about her that I don't know, made me very intimidated and afraid of her, but also I wanted to like hear her story and give her a big hug, you know.
And another thing I really love about her portrayal of Medusa, not even just her physical appearance, is the way that she talks. Because this is a reoccurring theme we're seeing with characters with a lot of lived-in history in this show. Chiron says, I believe, someone speaks about Chiron in one of the first two episodes, second episode, and they mention how he's been a warrior for centuries. This is a character that it could be so easy for him to be playing cards with Mr. D and being like, oh, we used to do this all the time. I've beat you. I'm 200 wins and only 20 losses and blah, blah, blah. We've had so much history, but they don't tell, they show.
Right.
Medusa did a great job. Jessica Parker Kennedy as Medusa did a fantastic job this episode of showing her history. Little like teases here and there of like calls him the son of Poseidon, and he points it out like, how did you already know? Word travels fast. That gets the gears in my head turning of how much else does she know? How much else has she taken in so quickly over time? So shout out what Jessica Parker Kennedy was able to do with this role. I love the look. I love her eyes. I love how we kind of get the Jaws effect too with her snake hair. We don't really see it. It's just kind of implied there. And the tension is all building up. A lot thanks to her dialogue, a lot thanks to her physical presence, but something we have to absolutely shout out. Bear McCreary's theme for Medusa.
Yes.
Oh, I'm scared right now just talking. I shouldn't have brought it up, Nicole. I'm scared. It was so eerie. It like gave me like some sort of like R&B blues Winter Soldier vibe. That sounds so strange, but someone will understand what I mean by that.
I didn't know exactly what you mean by that. Okay, when I heard, I'm like, I want that as a ringtone.
It's scary.
It's very scary.
It sold me for sure. One thing I did want to bring up with Medusa, and this is my biggest complaint of the episode because I thought it was just awkward. Mrs. Dodds is still pursuing Percy and the crew, and we get to Auntie M's, and again, I mentioned this last week. Monsters, CGI monsters in broad daylight is never going to work that well. You're always going to kind of see through the mist, so to speak. And when she is just like waiting outside, I thought that blocking was like a very odd choice. Like
it was just really weird.
Medusa peeks out the curtain and Mrs. Dodds is just like standing there, just like waiting, like plucking her wings into the pavement, and I was just like, that I don't fear you anymore when you're just kind of like waiting around. Did that also kind of irk you?
Yeah, I'm just like, you look like kind of a boring chicken. Like, I'm not scared of you anymore. Like, I feel like I could throw a rock at you and just take you out. Like, any scare that she had or potentially should have had, that blocking just was weird. It's like, you're supposed to be scary. I'm not scared of you.
Well, it's a good
Yeah.
thing that Medusa made up for it, because she was terrifying, and eventually
Absolutely.
when we get down to
Maybe
the basement
for
too,
one scary lady. I don't know.
more than enough for me. I actually, I don't know if I could have taken a second one. If Mrs. Dodds is actually scary, this episode might have been a PG-13 one for me. We get down to the basement, and this is when the horror kind of heightens up to another level, because again, show don't tell. We just get that basement, that wide depth shot of all of her victims of the past, and it sends shivers down my spine. And also too, because we get the revelation of later, Uncle Ferdinand was one of them, someone that Grover knows. Shout out Aryan Samhadri for acting his butt off in that scene, because the amount of implied history he sold with just his facial expression was leagues beyond what any 3 minutes of exposition would do. I wanted to bring up to you, obviously, the big ending sequence of how Medusa meets her fate.
Yes.
How impressed were you with how they were able to PG-ify the decapitation?
I was pretty impressed with that. I was considering that the basement was definitely like, I felt like I was walking into a horror movie, considering we were going into the creepy basement. I'm like, how are they going to pull this off and make it kid friendly? Oh, wow, they did a good job with that. Like, I was really concerned about that moment, because that's a full-on beheading, folks. Like, that's not kid safe. Like, I have a 7-year-old who like is obsessed with Percy Jackson. I'm like, is this safe for my boy to watch? Yes, it is. Good job.
It was very clever. It was great use, again, of taking these simple objects, these simple magical objects, and bringing a new meaning to them. The Yankees cap is something that I feel like there's a lot of ingenuity they can have with this throughout the entire series, let alone just this season. And I thought this was a brilliant way to kind of
so smart
use it for more than just turning invisible. Obviously, we mentioned earlier, Mrs. Dodds turns to stone. I guess she won't be a problem anymore, but you know, these Furies have escaped before, so we shall see what happens. But again, that's 2 for 2. Mrs. Dodds taking 1 stabbing from Riptide, done, back to the underworld. Now this time takes 1 look at Medusa, turn to stone, maybe back to the underworld. Not really sure how that works. Again, these Furies aren't scaring me. These are C-level villains. The real horror is Medusa here. And she only lost because, you know, invisibility cap. That was a little, you know, they got a weapon from under the ring to make a wrestling comparison. The referee just wasn't looking. So
exactly.
Who knows? Maybe she'll come back in a later season. But where she is now is Mount Olympus, Nicole. This was a big change from the books.
That was a huge change.
In The Lightning Thief, as readers will know, a little spoiler territory for those who haven't read the book, Medusa's head is brought back to the apartment that Gabe and Sally reside in. And Gabe kind of shares a look with Medusa, and we never hear from Gabe again. Who knows what happened to him?
Goodbye, Earl.
But instead, this time, they decide to package up Medusa's head, send it off to Olympus via a little thing called Hermes Express. And we get this like UPS guy going up the Empire State Building. He goes to the 600th floor, and the camera pans up, and it's Lin-Manuel Miranda, Hermes himself, delivering Medusa's head to Mount Olympus. Seeing Lin as Hermes for the first time, meeting another god. What's going through your head?
I did a little dancey dance. I was so excited. Like, I'm like, I know he's in this. When are we going to get him? When are we going to get him? How are we going to do it? They threw me the curveball by making this giant change. And then when that pulls back and we see it's him, I was just like, there's a reason I love this episode so much. Here we are. This moment. It was just considering how creepy Medusa was. And then we get this very lighthearted to me, it felt lighthearted. Maybe I'm just weird, but Lin-Manuel Miranda with the head in the box going on up. I'm just, I love it. I love it. We got Hermes. I love it.
And it did a great TV trick too of the elevator door opens and the light kind of comes in and we know Olympus is on the other side. And I'm like, turn the camera. I want to see it. I was so desperate to see Olympus, but again, good things come to those who wait. We've seen it. We've seen it in the trailer. We're going there at least by episode 8, maybe sooner. Who knows? But I'm glad that they're teasing it now because it gets people like me who are already invested in the series are along for the 5-week ride to get excited about where we're going. And I think it's going to rub off on new viewers who are like, okay, I'll try out this Percy Jackson show. Whoa, Olympus is coming into play. Let's stick around and see how that goes. Another thing I want to bring up about Hermes ending this episode. Technically speaking, Luke and Hermes were in the same episode of Percy Jackson. They didn't meet. We didn't see them interact face to face. Just that knowledge that on the credits of this episode, Charlie Bushnell and Lin-Manuel Miranda are both listed. I want season 5 right now, Nicole. I told you how patience is a virtue earlier and how it's an exposition. But stuff like this gets me so impatient because, man, when they link up, I believe it's Last Olympian. I believe it's like a dream sequence, a cabin and all that. It's my favorite scene in books ever. And the idea of that coming in live action is so tantalizing to me. I can't wait till we get there. But we'll have to wait and see because next week we're heading to St. Louis and we're getting the mother of all monsters, Echidna, played by the one, the only Suzanne Cryer. Going into next week, Nicole, how you feeling? Where do you think the momentum is right now? Does Percy Jackson need to do anything at its technically mid-season finale to up the momentum, or do you think momentum is strong right now?
I think momentum is strong right now, and I am really looking forward to next week because I literally just drove through St. Louis, and while I was driving through St. Louis, I was thinking about next week's episode already. So I was just like, I'm driving through St. Louis, Percy Jackson time. So no, I think the momentum is really good. I think the show is doing a really good job of building, but also giving us just enough to make us want to keep going. Like you said, with we didn't get to see what's going on the other side of the light. We know Olympus is back there. We know more stuff is coming. I think right now the pacing and the momentum is very, very good. My only real complaint is I want, like you, I want more. I'm a little greedy. I want some more stuff. But again, patience is a virtue. Remain chill. We'll get there. But I think right now is getting close to the mid-season finale type of situation. I think we're in a good place. I'm really excited for next week. I really am.
Yeah, and I'm very happy also that so many great moments have happened so far, but the reality is the best is yet to come. I don't even say that to hype up this show too much. The Underworld, Mount Olympus. We haven't even met Ares yet. We haven't met Poseidon or Zeus. We haven't gotten to the finale. We haven't returned to Camp Half-Blood. There are so many. We haven't got. I don't know if it's gonna happen, but there's a drachma conversation between Percy and Luke in The Lightning Thief, if I'm not mistaken. He checks in.
I believe so.
You get a little they're conversing. Oh, iris message. It's coming back to me. There's an iris message conversation.
That's it.
Trying to communicate through the water. And he's checking in how the shoe's treating you, this and that and that. There's a lot to look forward to. And it's so funny because the first time I watched this episode, there were some moments where I was like, a little corny, a little cheesy, not sure if I like that. And then I rewatch it and I'm picking out all the details with my mind on to discuss them. And I get even more excited. And the fact that this show for me so far is 3 for 3, where the rewatch is better than the original watch.
Yep.
Has me over the moon excited. And also it's clear that the rewatch is better than the original watch for most people too, because this thing set the Disney record for the top Disney branded television premiere in Disney's history. 13.2 million views across Hulu and Disney Plus. It did have that added bonus of going out on Hulu for the first 2 episodes. However, still first episode, I think. Either way, the premiere totaled 13.3 million views across Disney's streaming platforms, which makes it the biggest Disney branded television premiere of all time. And that just spells really good news for the future of Percy Jackson and for the future of this season. So I'm so glad everyone's along for the ride. I'm so glad that you're along for the ride, Nicole. I'm happy to be talking about this show with you. Happy to be on these mics. Before we officially get out of here, though, we just want to thank everyone for listening, for watching, however you consumed Riptide Radio. We appreciate you being here. But in order to keep this show going, in order to make sure we're able to do this for many, many more seasons to come, you got to like, you got to comment, you got to subscribe. So please do all 3 of those things before you officially get out of here. Nicole, thank you again for making the trek to be here. If I could stand up right now, I would give her a standing ovation, round of applause. She went through the underworld, through Tartarus.
I did.
Here. And we made it. We made it happen. So Nicole, If you have anything you're working on at comicbook.com, feel free to shout it out. But if you also just want to spread the love and holiday cheer, I
have nothing I want to share, but last time I told you all to read the books, and I discovered something that I was unaware of over the holidays. There are graphic novel versions of the books. Get them, read them. They're precious. And of course, Liam has one literally handy. Mine is in my kid's stuff.
One. I have.
Oh, he's got them all.
Them all. Look at that. Look at that stack. See,
and you will that's amazing. You will appreciate this.
Lost Hero.
Oh
Son
my
of
gosh.
Neptune. Mark of Athena. Everything, Nicole. Everything.
Oh my! You will appreciate this. We took a pit stop, just because you gotta stretch your legs when you're going through Tartarus. You have to.
Of course.
And we stopped at a bookstore, and they were dang near sold out of all things Percy Jackson. So, y'all go buy the graphic novels. Go buy the regular books. Read them. Any way you can.
Real.
They're amazing. They will enhance your watching experience.
And while I have it here, I can't not show off the last Olympian graphic novel cover. It is the greatest thing in comics history.
That is so sick.
I need to get this blown up and put on my wall somewhere right now.
I want that as a
My
poster.
big Percy Jackson poster. Again, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for reading these books. Thank you all for supporting Percy Jackson. Again, like, comment, subscribe. Share some love to Nicole on social media. Share some love with me on social media at Liam T. Crowley. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. All updates about the show will be on all three of those platforms, as well as at ComicBookNation, mostly on Twitter. And for more interview clips as well from the cast, from the crew, from everyone involved in this show, my Instagram at Liam T. Crowley over on Instagram Reels, or at ComicBook over on Instagram Reels as well. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week for episode 4 when we venture to St. Louis. We'll see you then.